I still remember that day like it just happened yesterday. The air was cold, the sky was the color of dirty dishwater, and my hands were trembling as I opened the front door. I'd just finished baking a pie, apple cinnamon his favorite, because after 3 long years, my husband, Charles, was finally coming home. 3 years of waiting, 3 years of praying, 3 years of convincing myself that love could outlast distance. But when I opened that door, my whole world tilted. There he was, Charles, standing on the porch, wearing that same old brown coat I'd mended twice before he left. His hair was grayer, his face thinner, but it was him. My heart leapt into my throat. I was ready to fall into his arms, ready to cry, to finally feel like life had meaning again. But before I could even speak, I saw them. A young woman standing just behind him, holding a little girl. And before I could ask a single question, that little girl looked up, pointed at Charles, and said, "Daddy." In that second, everything inside me froze. My smile faded, my breath caught, and the pie slipped right out of my hand, crashing to the floor. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't speak. My husband, the man I'd waited for, prayed for, was standing in front of me with another woman and a child who called him Daddy. That's when I realized something inside me had broken for good. Before I continue, my name is Evelyn, and I'm 69 years old. I spent most of my life as a nurse, helping others heal, patching up their wounds, and comforting their pain. But what I didn't know was that one day, I'd be the one needing the healing. And before I go on with this story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing how far our stories travel. Because the one you're about to hear, this one still hurts. You see, Charles and I had been married for 42 years. 42 years of building a life, raising kids, facing hard times, and holding hands through every storm. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine, or so I thought. When he said he was going overseas to work for a few years to help us retire comfortably, I believed him. I packed his bags, kissed him goodbye at the airport, and told him I'd be right here waiting. I didn't know that the man I was hugging that day was already halfway gone. The first few months after he left were hard, but I held on. We talked on the phone, exchanged letters, and sometimes he'd send me pictures, smiling in front of construction sites, talking about how he missed my cooking, how he couldn't wait to come home. I believed every word, but after a year, the calls started coming less often. The letters stopped, and when I asked about when he was coming back, he'd say, "Soon, honey, just a few more months." Those few months stretched into years. There were nights I'd sit on our porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars, whispering his name. I'd imagine him working hard, saving money, counting the days till we were together again. I refused to listen when neighbors started whispering. Maybe he's got someone else over there. Men forget easy. Don't wait too long, Evelyn. But I kept faith. Because love, to me, wasn't something you just walked away from. Until that afternoon. The one that shattered me. Charles stood there, looking guilty and small, while the young woman kept her eyes fixed on the ground. The child clung to her leg, innocent and smiling. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, the sound filling my ears like thunder. I whispered, "Charles." "Who are they?" He didn't answer. He just looked down, rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did when he was caught in a lie. I already knew the truth before he opened his mouth. I just didn't want to hear it. "Evelyn," he said softly, This is Angela. And this is..." He didn't even finish the sentence. He didn't need to. My whole body went cold. I stepped back, gripping the doorframe for balance. "You had a child?" I whispered. You have a child?" The little girl looked up again, smiling wide. "Daddy, can we go inside?" That word, Daddy, cut through me sharper than any knife could. For a long moment, no one said a word. The silence was heavy, painful, almost suffocating. The young woman, Angela, looked like she wanted to disappear. And Charles, he just stood there, staring at me with those same brown eyes I used to love, full of guilt and cowardice. I wanted to scream, to cry, to hit him, to ask why. but all I could manage was a whisper. After everything we built. This is how you come home? He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't want to hear it. I turned away and walked back inside, leaving the door open behind me. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the edge of the counter. I could still hear the little girl giggling outside, completely unaware that she'd just broken someone's world. And in that moment, I realized the man I'd been waiting for all those years wasn't coming home. He'd already been replaced. That was the day I learned that sometimes love doesn't die quietly. Sometimes it walks right up to your front door, holding someone else's hand. When Charles first told me he'd gotten a job overseas, I thought it was a blessing in disguise. We were both in our mid-60s back then, and retirement wasn't looking as bright as we hoped. Our savings had taken a hit, and Charles, always the proud provider, said he couldn't sit around doing nothing while bills piled up. It's just a few years. Evelyn, he'd said, holding my hand across the table. I'll go, make some money, and then we can finally live easy. Maybe even buy that lake house you always dreamed about. He smiled when he said that, and I believed him. Because that's what you do when you've spent your whole life loving someone. You trust them, even when your gut whispers otherwise. The night before he left, we sat on the porch together, sipping sweet tea as the crickets sang. The air was heavy and warm. He promised to call every week, to write, to send photos. I tucked a little note into his suitcase that said, "Come back home to me." He kissed my forehead and told me not to worry. For a while, he kept that promise. He called me from the airport when he landed. His voice was tired but warm. The first few months, he'd call twice a week, send pictures of his new apartment, talk about how different everything felt where he was. I'd listen, smiling, picturing him walking down busy streets, talking about missing my cornbread or the smell of fresh laundry on Sundays. Then the calls started getting shorter. He said he was busy, that the time difference was tough, that his new job demanded long hours. I understood, or at least I told myself I did. I never wanted to be the kind of wife who nagged. So I told him, "It's okay, Charles. Just take care of yourself. I'll be here." And I was. Every single day. I kept his side of the bed tidy, even ironed his shirts now and then, just so it felt like he'd be home any minute. I wrote him letters even when I wasn't sure he'd get them. And every time I walked past our wedding photo on the mantel, me in that lace dress, him grinning like a fool, I'd whisper, "We're still okay, right?" But after a year, the silence started to feel louder. His calls came maybe once a month, sometimes not at all. The photos stopped. The letters didn't come. Whenever I called him, he'd sound distant, distracted, like he couldn't wait to hang up. Once I heard a woman's voice in the background, and when I asked about it, he just laughed and said, "Oh, that's just a coworker." I wanted to believe him, so I did. People around town started asking questions. My neighbor, Martha, said, "Evelyn, honey, 3 years is a long time to be gone. You sure he's coming back?" I'd just smile and say, "Of course. He loves me." But the words tasted like ashes. I tried to fill the time. I started volunteering at the local hospital again, baking for church on Sundays, and calling our grown kids just to hear their voices. But no matter what I did, the house felt empty. The sound of his laughter was gone. The smell of his cologne faded from the sheets. At night, I'd sit in his old armchair and imagine him coming through the door, saying, "I'm home, sweetheart." But as time passed, that image started to feel less real, like a dream I was clinging to out of habit. Then one evening, about 2 years in, he called out of nowhere. His voice was shaky, nervous even. "Evelyn," he said, "I'm doing good here. Things are different but good. Don't worry, okay?" I laughed a little, said, "Different how, Charles?" He hesitated. That silence, that long, awful pause, told me more than his words ever could. Just different, he said finally. "People here are kind. Life feels slower. You'd like it." And then he hung up. That was the last time we spoke for nearly 6 months. I should have known something was wrong, but denial can be comforting when you're lonely. It's easier to make excuses for someone you love than to face the truth that they might have moved on. One afternoon, while cleaning out the mail, I found an envelope addressed to him. It was from some international bank, Nothing unusual, except it was labeled joint account. I didn't recognize the other name listed beside his. Angela Ross. My stomach dropped. I wanted to tell myself it was some kind of mistake. Maybe a work partner, maybe an assistant handling his paychecks. But deep down I knew. The name wouldn't leave my head. Angela Ross. It echoed in my mind for months. By the time the 3rd year came around, I wasn't even sure if he'd ever return. I'd stopped wearing my wedding ring at night. Not because I didn't love him, but because it hurt to look at it. Then one morning, I got a call. His voice sounded cheerful, like nothing had happened. "Evelyn," he said, "I'm coming home next week." My heart jumped. I didn't care about the years of silence, the missed birthdays, the broken promises. He was coming home. That was all that mattered. I cleaned the house, polished the floors, even bought fresh flowers for the kitchen table. I baked his favorite pie, the same one I'd made every year on our anniversary. I told myself this would be our new start, our second chance. But when he finally showed up at the door, he wasn't alone. That's when I realized the 3 years I spent waiting were years he spent building another life, one that didn't include me. When I opened that front door, my heart nearly stopped. There he was, Charles, the same man I'd waited 3 long years for. His hair had gone a little grayer, his face more lined, but those eyes, they were still the same soft brown I used to get lost in. For a second, it felt like time folded back, like all those lonely nights had been worth it. But then, reality hit, because standing right behind him was a young woman, couldn't have been more than 30, holding a little girl, maybe 3 years old, with Charles's same brown eyes. I remember just freezing. My hand still on the doorknob. My mouth open but no words coming out. The world went quiet except for the sound of that child giggling. Charles looked at me like he didn't know what to say either. He cleared his throat, rubbed the back of his neck, and finally said, "Evelyn, this is Angela, and, this is Emma." Angela gave me a nervous smile, clutching the child closer. And that little girl. God, that little girl. She looked right at Charles and said in the sweetest voice, "Daddy, can we go inside now?" That word, Daddy, hit me like a punch to the chest. I swear, for a moment, everything blurred. The ground, the air, even my own heartbeat felt far away. I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe this was all some cruel misunderstanding. But then Charles nodded and stepped forward, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I stepped back without even realizing it, opening the door wider. My voice cracked when I said, "Come in." Inside, everything looked exactly like he'd left it. His favorite chair, the photo of us on our 40th anniversary, the curtains I sewed myself. I watched his eyes scan the room, and for a split second, I saw guilt flicker across his face. Angela sat down carefully, the little girl climbing onto her lap. I stood across the room, my arms crossed so tight it hurt. Nobody spoke for a long while. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock above the fireplace. Finally, I said, "So, this is why you stopped calling." Charles sighed, looking everywhere but at me. "Evelyn, I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did," I laughed. I actually laughed. That bitter kind of laugh that doesn't sound human. "You didn't plan to cheat on your wife? You didn't plan to have a child with someone else while I was here waiting, still wearing your ring?" Angela looked down, her face red. "I didn't know he was married," she whispered. Not at first. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw every picture, every letter, every dream I'd kept alive for 3 damn years right in their faces. But I didn't. I just stood there, numb. Charles reached for me, his voice shaking. "Evelyn, please." I came back to make things right. "Make things right?" I repeated softly. "Charles, you came back with them. You built a whole other life while I was here keeping yours alive." The child, Emma, tugged at his sleeve, asking something about a toy, completely unaware of the storm brewing in the room. And in that moment, looking at her, something inside me cracked open, because it wasn't her fault. She didn't ask to be born into this mess. I turned to Charles and said, "You're her father, aren't you?" He nodded, barely audible. I closed my eyes. The tears didn't even fall. It was like I'd run out of them years ago. When I opened them again, I looked right at him and said, "You should have stayed gone." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout could have been. He tried to explain, fumbling through excuses. How he was lonely, how one mistake turned into something more, how he didn't know how to tell me. Every word felt like a lie stacked on top of another lie. And the whole time, that woman sat there holding his child, staring at the floor. She looked like she wanted to disappear. And for a moment, I pitied her. Because I could see it. She was just another woman who believed in his promises. After what felt like an eternity, I said, "You can both stay the night. I'm not heartless, but in the morning, you'll leave this house." Charles looked up, his eyes wide. "Evelyn, please don't do this. We can figure it out." "No," I said, cutting him off. "You figured it out the second you decided to play family somewhere else. I'm done waiting for the man I thought I married." Then I turned and walked out of the room. My knees were shaking, my chest tight, but I didn't stop. I went into my bedroom, shut the door, and leaned against it until I could finally breathe again. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of that little girl's laughter echoing through the house, the same house where love used to live. And for the first time in years, I realized something. The man who left 3 years ago never really came back. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, Charles, that young woman, and the little girl who called him Daddy. My mind replayed it like a broken movie reel, looping over and over again. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands trembling, staring at the half-empty side where he used to sleep. For 3 years, that space had been cold, but knowing now why, knowing who had been warming his bed all that time, made the emptiness sting deeper. The clock ticked past midnight. I could hear faint murmurs from the guest room. Their voices hushed, a child's sleepy giggle. It hit me then. He wasn't a stranger in that family. He was their world. At dawn, I finally stood up, washed my face, and went to the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air. Mine, strong and black, just the way I liked it. I sat down at the table and waited. When Charles walked in, his hair was messy, his eyes tired, but he still had the nerve to say, "Morning, Eve." Like we were still us. Like the last 3 years hadn't just shattered the life we built together. I looked up at him, steady, but cold. "We need to talk," I said. He sat across from me, folding his hands like a guilty man in a courtroom. "Evelyn, I know how this looks, but you gotta believe me. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I stared at him. "You didn't mean to disappear for 3 years? You didn't mean to start another family? Tell me, Charles, what exactly did you mean to do?" He rubbed his temples, sighing. "I was lonely, Eve. You don't know how hard it was out there. I met Angela at work. She was kind. Things just got complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. "That's what you call it?" He flinched at my tone. I didn't plan to fall in love with her. My laugh came out sharp and humorless. "Love? Don't you dare use that word in this house. You don't get to play husband and father somewhere else and then come back here pretending it was all some accident." Angela stepped into the kitchen then, still in her robe, her face pale. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller," she said softly. "If I'd known he was married, I never would have—" I held up my hand. Don't you dare apologize to me for his choices. You didn't make promises to me. He did." She nodded, eyes glistening, and quietly stepped back. Charles leaned forward, his voice low, pleading. "Evelyn, I came back because I want to fix this. I can take care of everyone." I slammed my palm on the table. The sound startled even me. "Fix this? You can't fix betrayal, Charles. You can't patch over years of silence with sorries and good intentions. You can't live 2 lives and expect me to just stand by." For a long moment, neither of us said a word. The only sound was the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Finally, I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed calm. "You and your family can stay until morning. I won't have a child out on the street. But come sunrise, you'll leave this house. All of you." He looked stunned. "Eve, this is our home." I looked around the room, the curtains I'd sewn, the family photos on the walls, the smell of the pie I'd baked the night before he returned. I met his eyes and said quietly, "No, Charles. This was our home. Now it's just mine." His mouth opened, but no words came out. He sat there, helpless, staring at the woman who'd once waited for him like he was her whole world. I turned to leave the kitchen, but something stopped me. I looked back and said, "You know what hurts most, Charles? It's not that you loved someone else. It's that you let me keep loving a ghost. You left me waiting for a man who didn't exist anymore." He looked down. His shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I shook my head. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught." I walked to the window and watched the sunrise spilling over the backyard. The light felt colder than usual, like even the morning didn't know how to comfort me. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps. Angela's voice whispering to the child, telling her to get ready. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I turned back, Charles was standing, watching me with tears in his eyes. "Evelyn," he said, "please don't hate me." I met his gaze and said, "I don't hate you, Charles. I pity you, because someday that little girl will grow up, and she'll know what kind of man her father really is." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just nodded, his head low. Then I walked past him, the same way he once walked out on me, without looking back. That morning, as they packed their things and left, the sound of the car engine fading down the street felt like the end of a long, cruel song. And in that silence, I finally understood something. Closure doesn't always come from an apology. Sometimes it comes from the sound of a door closing behind someone who never deserved to come back. After they left that morning, the house went quiet. Too quiet. You'd think silence would bring peace, but not that kind. No, this silence felt heavy, like every corner of the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to break. I stood by the window, watching their car disappear down the road. And for the first time in years, I didn't cry. My tears had dried up long before that door ever opened. What replaced them was something different, something colder. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Charles had told me he'd be gone for just a little while. I could still picture his smile, the way he'd promised to call every week, the way I'd believed him. God, I'd built my whole world around those promises. 3 years of waiting, 3 years of praying, 3 years of holding on to a love that had already died. And now, sitting in that empty kitchen, it finally hit me. I wasn't angry because he cheated. I was angry because I let myself become someone who waited for scraps. That realization cut deep. I walked through the house, touching things that once meant something. Our wedding photo, the coat he used to wear, the chair he'd fall asleep in watching TV. Every item told a story I no longer wanted to remember. When I reached our bedroom, I stood at the doorway for a long time. The bed looked too big now. Half of it felt haunted, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I stripped the sheets, threw them in a trash bag, and took down the framed photo from the nightstand. The one where he was holding me close, whispering something about forever. Forever. What a cruel little word. As I packed away those memories, I found a small box at the bottom of my dresser. Inside was every letter he'd ever sent me during those first months away. His handwriting looked different then, neat, certain, full of love. I read one, then another. Each one ended with, "Yours always, Charles." I wanted to laugh at the irony. Always. I took the letters outside, set them on the grill, and struck a match. The flames caught fast, curling the paper into ash. I stood there, watching our love go up in smoke, and for the first time I didn't feel pain. I felt release. That's when the revelation came. It wasn't just about him. It was about me. All those years I had convinced myself that loyalty was the same as love, that patience was proof of devotion, but loyalty without respect is just slow self-destruction. And I had been destroying myself one hopeful day at a time. I thought about who I used to be. Evelyn Johnson, the girl who danced barefoot in the rain, who dreamed of traveling, who laughed too loud and loved too hard. Somewhere between marriage and heartbreak, I'd lost her. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to find her again. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the porch, and listened to the cicadas hum in the dark. I looked up at the stars, the same stars I used to wish on when Charles was gone, and I said out loud, "You don't get to own my story anymore." It felt strange, talking to the night, but freeing too, like the universe was listening. Over the next few weeks, I started putting my life back together, quietly. I joined a local women's group, most of them widows or divorcees, all with stories of betrayal or loss. We'd sit in a circle every Thursday, drink coffee, and talk about the things we used to hide. I told them about Charles, about Angela, about Emma. And when I was done, one of the women, a fiery 72-year-old named June, leaned over, smiled, and said, "Honey, men like that are lessons, not losses." That line stuck with me. Lessons, not losses. It made me realize something else. I wasn't broken. I was just waking up. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found Charles's wedding ring sitting in an old jewelry dish by the sink. I picked it up, felt its weight in my palm, and knew what I needed to do. I drove to the post office, slipped it into a small envelope, and mailed it to the return address he'd used on one of his old letters. No note, no explanation, just the ring. Later that evening, I got a text from an unknown number. It was him, Evelyn. "You didn't have to send this." I stared at the message for a while, then typed back, "I did. It was never mine to keep, and that was it. No more calls, no more words, just quiet closure." For years, I thought the end of love meant the end of me. But sitting there in that empty house, I realized something powerful. Endings aren't punishments. They're invitations. An invitation to rediscover who you are when the noise stops. So that night, I turned off all the lights, sat in the living room, and whispered to myself, "You made it, Evelyn. You're still here." And for the first time in 3 long years, I believed it. It's been almost a year since that day Charles walked back into my life, and then right out again. Funny how time softens the sharpest edges, but it never really erases the scars. I still catch myself glancing at the driveway sometimes, expecting to see his old truck there. But then I smile, because I know it's not coming back, and that's a good thing. You see, for a long time, I thought closure came from answers. From apologies, from someone admitting they were wrong. But that's not how life works, is it? Sometimes closure isn't something they give you. It's something you take for yourself. And that's exactly what I did. I used to think love was about holding on, about fighting through the pain, proving your loyalty, keeping every promise even when the other person stopped keeping theirs. But love, real love, should never make you lose yourself. It should never make you feel small. And that's the truth I wish I had learned sooner. After Charles left the second time, people expected me to be angry. My friends told me to move on, to find someone new. But I didn't want to fill the empty space with noise again. I wanted peace, so I started slow. I began with morning walks. Just me, the sunrise, and a cup of coffee in my travel mug. I'd pass the same old oak tree at the end of the road and whisper, "I'm still here." Every day. Like a little promise to myself. I picked up old hobbies too. Painting, gardening, reading books I never had time for when I was too busy keeping someone else happy. My backyard became my little sanctuary. I'd spend hours there, hands in the dirt, feeling the earth remind me that life keeps going, no matter what's been lost. One afternoon, while tending to my roses, I found an old photo stuck between 2 garden books. It was from our wedding day. I looked at my younger self. The bright eyes, the soft smile, the way I was holding Charles's hand like he was the only thing keeping me upright. For a moment, I felt a pang in my chest. But instead of sadness, I felt gratitude. Because that woman in the photo had no idea what was coming, and yet, she survived it all. She became me, and I realized something then. Heartbreak doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do after. I could have let bitterness consume me. I could have become one of those women who spend the rest of their lives talking about what went wrong. But no, I didn't want my story to end in anger. I wanted it to end in peace. in acceptance. Because when you've lived as long as I have, 69 years and counting, you understand something about people. You can't control how they love you. You can only control how you love yourself. That truth changed everything for me. I started talking at the women's group about forgiveness. Not the kind that lets someone back into your life, but the kind that frees you from theirs. The kind that says, I don't hate you, but I also don't need you. It's powerful. One night after our meeting, a younger woman came up to me, tears in her eyes. She said, Miss Evelyn, hearing your story saved me. I thought I was the only one. And right then I understood why all this happened. Maybe my pain wasn't meant to destroy me. Maybe it was meant to help someone else find their strength too. Life's funny like that. It takes everything from you. Your comfort, your pride, your illusion of control. And then, in the middle of the mess, it hands you a lesson. A bitter one, yes, but a lesson all the same. The lesson I learned? That the only person you truly need to come home to is yourself. And that happily ever after doesn't always mean walking into the sunset with someone holding your hand. Sometimes it means sitting on your porch alone at dusk, sipping tea and feeling content. Because for once, your peace isn't tied to someone else's presence. Now, every morning I wake up and thank God for the quiet, for the chance to start fresh, even this late in life. I tend to my garden, feed the stray cat that visits, and hum to myself while the sun rises. I don't wait for calls anymore. I don't replay old memories. I don't wonder what if, because I've learned that some people are chapters, not the whole story. And as for Charles, well, wherever he is, I hope he finds whatever he was looking for. But as for me, I've already found it, right here, within myself. So if you're listening to my story and you're holding on to someone who's already gone, let them go. You deserve more than being someone's backup plan. You deserve to be chosen, not tolerated. Loved, not used. And when the world feels empty, when the silence starts to ache, remember this. Peace doesn't come from others returning. It comes from you returning to yourself. That's what I did. That's what I'll keep doing. And maybe, just maybe, that's what freedom really means.